The bank called me during my own family's wedding reception to ask if I was authorizing thousands of dollars in charges on my credit card. The strange part was that I wasn't even invited to the wedding they were using my card to pay for. That single phone call exposed years of lies, betrayal, and the moment my family realized they had picked the wrong daughter to take advantage of. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Maren Whitlock, and for most of my life, I believed that if I worked hard and treated people with kindness, they would do the same for me. I lived in Denver and worked as a financial analyst. My job was demanding, but I enjoyed it because I liked solving problems and planning for the future. I earned a good salary, but nothing came easily. I spent years studying, working overtime, and making careful choices with my money. While other people took expensive vacations or bought luxury items, I focused on saving and building a stable life. Whenever someone in my family needed help, I was the first person they called. If a bill needed to be paid, I helped. If someone needed a small loan, I gave it without asking for much in return. I never kept score because they were my family, and I believed families should support each other. My younger sister, Coralie, had a very different life. Things always seemed to work out for her. Our parents, Byron and Lynette Whitlock, always gave her extra attention and made excuses whenever she made mistakes. I tried not to let it bother me. I told myself every family was different, and maybe I was just imagining things. Over time, I learned to stay quiet instead of arguing. It seemed easier that way. A few weeks before everything fell apart, something changed. My parents stopped calling as often. When I called them, they usually said they were busy and promised to talk later, but later never came. Coralie didn't answer my messages either. We usually met for dinner at least once a month, but every invitation was canceled at the last minute. One time my mother said she wasn't feeling well. Another time my father claimed he had extra work. Coralie said she was dealing with something personal and would explain another day. I believed them because I had no reason not to. Life gets busy, and I thought everyone was simply caught up with their own problems. I kept focusing on my work, never once thinking that while I was trying to stay connected, the people I trusted most were quietly building a secret that would change the way I looked at my family forever. A few days later, I stopped by my parents' house to pick up a package that had been sent to my old address by mistake. Since I still received a few pieces of mail there every now and then, it wasn't unusual. My parents weren't home, so I used the spare key they had given me years earlier. The stack of mail was sitting on the kitchen counter. As I sorted through it, one envelope caught my attention. It was already open, and a printed invoice had slipped halfway out. I wasn't trying to read anyone else's business, but I froze when I saw Coralie's full name at the top of the page. The invoice was from a luxury wedding venue, and the amount listed was far more than I expected. My heart started beating faster as I looked at the date. The wedding was only 4 days away. For a moment, I honestly thought there had to be some mistake. Maybe it was for a friend, or maybe it was an event she was helping organize. But everything on the paper clearly showed it was her wedding. I stood there in complete silence, trying to understand why nobody had told me. I wasn't angry at first. I was confused. I kept asking myself if I had forgotten something or misunderstood a conversation. After leaving the house, I called my mother. She answered after several rings, sounding surprised to hear from me. I calmly asked her if Coralie was getting married that weekend. There was a long pause before she finally admitted it. She didn't sound excited or apologetic. She simply said yes, as if it wasn't a big deal. I asked why nobody had mentioned it to me. Her answer hurt more than I expected. She said they wanted a smaller ceremony with only the people who would make the day peaceful. Then she quietly added that my presence might have made things uncomfortable. I didn't even know what she meant. I had never argued with Coralie about her relationship or caused problems at family events. I asked if I had done something wrong, but she avoided the question and repeated that this was the decision they had made. Before ending the call, she told me not to take it personally and said they hoped I would understand. I sat in my car for a long time after that conversation. The pain wasn't just about missing a wedding. It was about realizing that my own family had planned one of the biggest days of Coralie's life without thinking I deserved to be there. I had spent years helping them whenever they needed me, never asking for praise or attention. Yet when they celebrated something important, they erased me without hesitation. I thought about calling Coralie, but I stopped myself. If she wanted me there, She would have invited me herself. I refused to beg for a place in a room where I clearly wasn't wanted. So I wiped away my tears, started my car, and drove home, telling myself that some answers only bring more pain, and sometimes silence says everything. The day of the wedding came, and I treated it like any other workday. I had accepted that I wasn't part of my sister's celebration, so I buried myself in my job instead of thinking about it. That evening, I stayed late at the office to finish an important financial report. Most of my co-workers had already gone home, and the building was quiet. I was reviewing numbers on my computer when my phone started ringing. The screen showed it was my bank. At first, I thought it might be a routine call, but something told me I should answer. The woman on the line introduced herself from the bank's fraud department. She asked if I was currently making several large purchases with my credit card. I immediately said no because I was sitting at my desk and my wallet was right beside me. She asked me to stay on the line while she read the transactions one by one. The first charge was for a luxury hotel ballroom. The second was for an expensive florist. Then came a catering company, a jewelry boutique, and finally another payment connected to an event venue. Each amount was thousands of dollars. By the time she finished reading the list, the total was close to $28,000. I felt completely shocked. I told her I had not approved a single one of those charges. She asked me to confirm that my card was still in my possession. I opened my wallet and found it exactly where it always stayed. I read the last 4 digits to her, and she confirmed it matched the account being used. She immediately placed a freeze on my credit card and blocked any future transactions. Then she explained that because several payments had been attempted one after another, the bank's security system had detected unusual activity. Some charges had already gone through before the account was frozen, but several others had been declined automatically. She apologized for the inconvenience and assured me that a fraud investigation would begin right away. As she continued explaining the next steps, something suddenly clicked in my mind. The businesses she listed weren't random. They were exactly the kinds of places someone would pay on the day of a large wedding. My heart started racing as I remembered the invoice I had found only a few days earlier. The wedding was happening that very evening. I slowly asked the bank representative if all the charges had happened within the last hour. She said yes. I thanked her, ended the call, and stared at my phone without moving. Everything became clear at once. Someone had used my personal credit card to pay for expenses connected to Coralie's wedding. Since several payments had failed after the account was frozen, I knew there had to be confusion at the reception. Vendors were probably asking questions, and bills were no longer being approved. I wasn't happy about what was happening, but I also knew I had done nothing wrong. Whoever made those charges had created this disaster, not me. And for the first time, I realized that the secret my family had been hiding was much worse than simply leaving me off the guest list. About 20 minutes after I ended the call with the bank, my phone rang again. This time, it was a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but I answered anyway. The man on the other end introduced himself as the manager of the wedding venue. He sounded stressed and asked if he was speaking with Marin Whitlock. When I said yes, he explained that my phone number was listed as the contact for one of the payment authorizations. He wanted to know if I was coming to settle the remaining balance because several transactions had suddenly failed. I calmly told him that I had never agreed to pay for any wedding and that my bank had already opened a fraud case. There was a long silence before he quietly apologized. He sounded surprised and said he had no idea the payments might have been unauthorized. He explained that deposits had been made over the past several weeks using my credit card information. My stomach dropped. This wasn't something that had happened only that day. Someone had been using my card details for a long time without my knowledge. As soon as the call ended, I tried to remember how anyone could have gotten my card information. Then one memory came rushing back. A few months earlier, I had gone to my parents' house for dinner. When I got home that night, I realized my wallet was missing. I called my mother, and she told me it was sitting on the kitchen counter. I picked it up the next afternoon. At the time, I never thought anything about it because everything inside looked normal. Now that memory felt completely different. I wondered if someone had copied my card information while my wallet was left there overnight. The next morning, I spoke with the bank's fraud investigator. I answered every question honestly and gave them all the information I could remember. They assured me they would review payment records, signatures, and security footage from the businesses involved. While the investigation moved forward, the problems at the wedding became worse. Vendors who had not received their money refused to continue providing services unless they were paid immediately. The caterer demanded payment before serving the remaining food. The florist wanted the final balance. Other businesses were asking the same questions. Guests began noticing that something was seriously wrong. Instead of enjoying the reception, people watched family members arguing in different corners of the room. Corley was crying. My parents were trying to calm everyone down while speaking with the vendors. The groom's family looked confused and embarrassed because they had no idea why payments were suddenly being rejected. What was supposed to be a beautiful celebration slowly turned into an uncomfortable public scene. People whispered to each other as the tension grew. No one seemed to know how everything had gone so wrong. I sat quietly in my apartment, thinking about everything that had happened. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt betrayed. The people I had trusted most had placed me in the middle of a disaster I never agreed to be part of, and I knew this story was only beginning. The morning after the wedding, I expected at least one phone call with an apology or an explanation. Instead, my phone rang, and my father's name appeared on the screen. The moment I answered, he started yelling. He didn't ask how I was doing or whether I knew what had happened. He blamed me for everything. He said I had destroyed Corley's wedding and embarrassed the entire family. I tried to explain that I had simply reported fraud after the bank contacted me, but he refused to listen. He kept saying that if I had really cared about my family, I would have stayed quiet and fixed the problem later. Before I could answer, my mother took the phone. Her voice was cold and full of anger. She said I earned more money than anyone else in the family, and that paying for the wedding would not have hurt me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She wasn't denying that my card had been used. She wasn't even pretending it had been a mistake. She spoke as if they had every right to spend my money without asking because I could afford it. I asked one simple question. Were you ever planning to tell me? She stayed silent for a few seconds before saying they didn't think it was necessary because I always helped the family anyway. That answer hurt more than all the lies. A few minutes later, Corley called me herself. She was crying so loudly that it was hard to understand her. Between tears, she accused me of ruining the happiest day of her life. She claimed I had always been jealous because things came easier for her. I honestly didn't know where those words came from. I had supported her for years. I had celebrated her successes and never tried to compete with her. Hearing her twist the story made me realize she truly believed I was the villain. She never once asked how my credit card had been used without my permission. She only cared that the payments had stopped. After the calls ended, I sat alone in complete silence. I replayed every conversation in my head. For years, I had convinced myself that my parents treated Corley differently because she was younger. I told myself it wasn't favoritism. I made excuses every time I felt left out. But now there was nothing left to explain away. The truth was standing right in front of me. They had planned an expensive wedding, secretly used my credit card to pay for it, left me off the guest list, and expected me to accept it without asking questions. They never planned to repay me. They believed I would simply keep working, earning money, and cleaning up their problems like I always had. At that moment, something inside me changed. I stopped feeling guilty for protecting myself. I finally understood that the biggest betrayal wasn't the stolen money. It was realizing that the people I loved had stopped seeing me as a daughter and started seeing me as nothing more than a wallet they believed belonged to them. After those phone calls, I made a decision that was not easy, but it was necessary. I was not going to argue with my family anymore. I was not going to let them pressure me into feeling guilty for protecting myself. From that moment on, I spoke only with the bank investigators and the people handling the fraud case. I answered every question carefully and gave them every document they requested. I printed my bank statements, showed the timeline of the charges, and explained where I had been when each payment was made. My work records and office security logs confirmed that I was nowhere near any of those businesses when the transactions happened. Everything matched my story. A few days later, one of the investigators called to give me an update. Several businesses had security cameras, and they had agreed to share their recordings. The videos showed my father, Byron, speaking with employees while arranging payments. In another recording, my mother, Lynette, was signing paperwork connected to the wedding contracts. Neither of them was hiding their identity because they believed everything would go through without any problems. The investigator told me this evidence was very important because it clearly showed that other people had been using my financial information instead of me. Hearing that made my heart sink. Part of me had still hoped there had been some misunderstanding, but the evidence left no room for doubt. My parents had knowingly used my card information without asking me. Around the same time, more details started reaching the groom, Dashiell Mercer. Until then, he believed the wedding had been paid for by Corley's family. When vendors began explaining why the payments had failed, he learned that the money had come from my personal credit card instead. He was shocked. He confronted Corley and asked her directly if she knew where the money had come from. She avoided giving a clear answer. Then he spoke with my parents, hoping they would explain everything honestly. Instead, they gave different answers and blamed the bank, the vendors, and even me. The more questions Dashiell asked, the more confused he became. Eventually, he realized that important facts had been hidden from him from the very beginning. He had entered the marriage believing everything had been handled honestly, but now he understood that the wedding had been built on lies. I later heard from one of the investigators that Dashiell had started cooperating as well. He wanted to know exactly what had happened because he did not want his name connected to fraud. For the first time, someone outside my side of the story was asking the same questions I had been asking. I didn't celebrate his disappointment because he had also been misled. He was another person who had trusted my family and discovered the truth too late. As the investigation continued, I felt stronger than I had in weeks. I wasn't seeking revenge through anger or shouting. I was simply allowing the facts to speak for themselves, and those facts were revealing everything my family had tried so hard to hide. As the weeks passed, the investigation became much bigger than anyone in my family had expected. What started as a few suspicious credit card charges turned into a case involving several businesses. The vendors who had not received their money began filing official complaints because they had provided services based on payments that later failed or were disputed. Each company had its own records, contracts, and employees who could explain what had happened. Every new statement added another piece to the same story. It became harder and harder for anyone to deny the truth. I stayed focused on my normal life and continued going to work every day. I didn't contact my family, and I didn't respond to angry messages from relatives who only knew part of the story. I trusted that the facts would eventually speak for themselves. Meanwhile, life inside my parents' home became more stressful with each passing day. Corley and Dashiell were no longer enjoying the excitement of being newly married. Instead, they argued almost every day about the problems surrounding the wedding. Dashiell had lost trust in the people who had promised to welcome him into their family. His parents were embarrassed that their relatives had witnessed such a public disaster. They urged him to keep his money completely separate from Corley until everything was resolved. They wanted to make sure nothing similar could ever happen again. My father also found himself facing serious legal problems. Investigators continued reviewing documents and evidence, and he was informed that criminal charges were possible because of the unauthorized use of my financial information. My mother reacted differently. Instead of accepting responsibility, she began calling relatives one by one. She claimed I had made everything up because I was bitter about missing the wedding. She insisted I was trying to destroy the family out of jealousy. At first, a few people believed her because they had only heard her version of events. But that changed as more information became available. The documents, bank records, and witness statements all supported my account. The truth became impossible to ignore. Slowly, relatives who had stayed silent started reaching out to me. Some apologized for believing the rumors. Others admitted they had noticed for years that I was treated differently, but never spoke up because they didn't want family drama. Hearing those words was painful because it meant people had seen the unfair treatment long before I accepted it myself. Looking back, they remembered birthdays where my achievements were ignored while Corley was praised for much smaller things. They remembered holidays when I was expected to help with everything while everyone else relaxed. They remembered how I was always the one asked to solve problems without receiving much appreciation. For the first time in my life, I felt seen. Not because people suddenly felt sorry for me, but because they finally admitted what had been happening all along. The lies my parents had depended on for years were falling apart, and they had no one left to blame except themselves. After everything that had happened, I realized I had two choices. I could spend every day thinking about what my family had done to me, or I could put my energy into building a better future. I chose the second option. The pain was still there, but I refused to let it control the rest of my life. I focused on my work, took better care of myself, and started making plans that I had delayed for years. One of my biggest dreams had always been to own a home. I had saved money for a long time, but I kept putting it off because I was always helping someone else. This time, I decided to do something for myself. After looking at several places, I found a small house that felt warm and peaceful. The day I received the keys, I stood inside the empty living room with a smile on my face. It wasn't the biggest house, but it belonged to me. For the first time, I truly felt like I was starting a new chapter. A few months later, my manager called me into his office. He thanked me for my hard work and told me I was being promoted to a senior position. He said I had always been reliable, honest, and calm under pressure. Hearing those words meant a lot because they reminded me that my value was not decided by how my family treated me. I had earned my success through my own effort. Outside of work, I wanted to do something meaningful with what I had learned. I started volunteering with a local financial literacy organization that taught people how to protect themselves from scams, identity theft, and financial fraud. I shared simple advice about checking bank accounts, protecting personal information, and reporting suspicious activity quickly. Every time someone thanked me for helping them avoid a mistake, I felt like something good was growing from one of the worst experiences of my life. During one of the organization's community events, I met Everett Sloan. He was an architect who had volunteered to help redesign the group's office space. We started talking during a lunch break, and the conversation felt easy from the beginning. He asked about my interests, my career, and the volunteer work, but he never asked how much money I made or what I could do for him. He listened carefully when I spoke and respected my opinions. Over the next few weeks, we spent more time together. He made me laugh without trying too hard, and he never judged me for the difficult situation with my family. Instead, he admired that I had stayed honest even when it would have been easier to give up. Being around him felt different from anything I had known before. I didn't feel responsible for fixing someone else's problems. I didn't feel like I had to earn kindness by sacrificing myself. For the first time in many years, I experienced what real respect looked like, and I realized that healthy relationships are built on trust, honesty, and equal care, not on guilt or obligation. Several months passed without any contact from my parents or Coralie. The silence gave me time to heal, and I slowly became comfortable with the peaceful life I had created. Then one Saturday afternoon, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, I froze. Standing on my front porch were my father, my mother, and Coralie. They all looked tired and worried. No one smiled. For a few seconds, none of us spoke. Finally, my father quietly asked if they could come inside. I didn't want to argue with them in front of my neighbors, so I stepped aside and let them into the living room. They looked around my house before sitting down. The confidence they had shown months earlier was completely gone. My mother was the first to speak. She said things had become very difficult. Legal bills had continued to grow, and the financial pressure was more than they expected. She admitted they needed help. My father cleared his throat and said they wanted me to forgive them. Then he asked if I would withdraw my statements and tell the investigators that everything had been a misunderstanding. I looked at him without saying a word. Before I could answer, Coralie started crying. She said her marriage had become filled with stress because of everything that had happened. She begged me to help them move on and said we were still family. As I listened, I noticed something important. Not one of them had apologized for using my credit card without permission. Not one of them admitted that what they had done was wrong. They only talked about how difficult life had become for them. I took a deep breath and calmly asked them one question. When you planned the wedding, did any of you think about inviting me? They all stayed silent. I continued speaking. I reminded them that they had chosen to leave me out of one of the happiest days of their lives while secretly expecting me to pay for it. They wanted my money, but they didn't want my presence. They treated me like someone who existed only when they needed financial help. My mother tried to interrupt, saying they had made mistakes, but I gently stopped her. I told them I was no longer interested in excuses. I explained that forgiveness and accountability were not the same thing. Maybe one day I would forgive them for my own peace of mind, but that would never erase the choices they had made or the consequences of those choices. I would not lie to investigators, and I would not become responsible for fixing another problem they had created themselves. The room became quiet again. My father slowly stood up, realizing there was nothing left to say. They walked toward the front door without another argument. Before they left, I wished them well because I truly meant it. I didn't hate them anymore. I simply understood that loving someone does not mean allowing them to keep hurting you. I closed the door behind them, locked it, and walked back into my home feeling lighter than I had in a very long time. The months that followed brought a sense of closure that I never thought I would have. The legal process was long, but I stayed patient and trusted the system to handle the truth. When the investigation finally ended, the evidence was clear. The people responsible for the unauthorized charges were held accountable, and financial restitution was ordered to cover the money that had been taken from me. My credit history was repaired, and my name was cleared completely. The thing my family tried to make look like my mistake was finally recognized for what it was. I had protected myself, and I had done nothing wrong. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could move forward without carrying the weight of what happened. During that period, I also learned more about what had happened inside Corley's marriage. The trust between her and Dashiell had been damaged badly. A marriage cannot grow when it begins with secrets and dishonesty. They tried to work through their problems, but the foundation they started with was difficult to repair. I didn't take pleasure in watching their struggles because I knew what it felt like to be hurt by people you trusted. I simply accepted that every choice comes with consequences. My parents also had to face the results of their actions. For years, they had protected Corley from mistakes and expected me to handle responsibilities quietly. They believed my patience meant I would always forgive everything. But they finally learned that even the most understanding person has limits. Around the same time, my own life continued becoming better. I spent an evening at a small restaurant with Everett, enjoying a quiet dinner and talking about our plans for the future. As I looked around and realized how peaceful my life had become, I thought about everything that had happened. There was a time when I believed revenge meant making people suffer the way they had made me suffer. But I understood something important. The greatest revenge was never destroying someone else's life. It was refusing to let their actions destroy mine. I had rebuilt my confidence, created a safe home, grown in my career, and surrounded myself with people who valued me for who I was. I no longer needed approval from the people who failed to appreciate me. Looking back, I still wish things had been different. I wish my family had chosen honesty instead of taking advantage of my kindness. But I also know that walking away from unhealthy relationships can sometimes be the strongest decision a person can make. Real family is not about sharing the same last name. It is about trust, respect, and genuine care. Love should never come with conditions, and support should never be something people demand while giving nothing in return. I lost the family I thought I had, but I found something even more valuable. I found myself.